Hi, Ashley here, and welcome to my messy life. If you are new here, hi, my name is Ashley. I'm a stay-at-home mom of 5, a wife, and a senior studying criminology at a university in the state of Florida. My channel is kind of a mixed bag. I have lots of different types of videos on this channel: product reviews, recipes, story times, true crime, all sorts of things. If you are a returning subscriber, thank you so much for subscribing to my channel, and thank you for coming back. It means a lot. Without further ado, let's get into today's video. Also, you might want to grab a cup of coffee, a basket of laundry, or a sink full of dishes because this one is gonna be a long one. I hope you learned something new. I sure did. Today's video comes with a trigger warning. We will be talking about the death penalty. We will also be talking about the use of nitrogen hypoxia as an alternative form of execution as opposed to lethal injection and what some of the pluses to that might be. There will be a video clip in this video of some preference testing done in another country where they essentially are asking the animals which inert gas makes them panic and which does not. So if any of these things bother you and will trigger you, this is not the video for you. Today's video is going to be a continuation of my death penalty video that I posted last week. I'm going to talk mainly about the use of nitrogen hypoxia as an alternative form of execution. This is coming up a lot in a few different states, and particularly in Alabama, they're having issues with completing executions due to some issues that they're having finding medications or finding inmates' veins. And there was one execution that took 2 hours to complete due to not being able to find the prisoner's vein. Another one had to be completely stayed, and I don't believe they're even going to try to execute this guy because it was just so traumatic. It was traumatic for everybody involved, not just the inmate. So I don't think they're going to be executing this inmate until, at the very least, there's something else available, some other way to execute them. I'm going to be shooting this video over multiple days and then putting it out on Saturday because I'm going to my niece's wedding on Friday. So it's going to be kind of weird. I'm probably going to be in different clothes almost every segment. So just a warning. There's going to be lots of articles in this video, and I'm going to talk about the benefits of possibly using the nitrogen hypoxia. And they say that it's unstudied. However, there have been studies done because they use nitrogen to simulate hypoxia for airline pilots as well as military pilots. So they know what it's going to do. They know how it feels. And if the pilots were not rescued from the nitrogen being used on them, if they didn't discontinue the use, they would die. So there are pilots that know what it feels like and have actually said in comments, which I will show, that nitrogen is the way to go. Like, it's just falling asleep. You feel euphoric for a few minutes and then you pass out. And if they didn't start delivering oxygen to those pilots at that point, those pilots would die. So to use the excuse that it's untested, I feel is a little ridiculous, but that's my personal opinion, and I'm gonna leave most of my personal opinion out of this. I'm gonna try really hard to be objective in this situation. This first article is an article from Newsmax. Alabama pauses executions after third failed lethal injection. Monday, 21st of November, 2022. Very recent article. Alabama Governor Kay Ivey sought a pause in executions and ordered a top-to-bottom review of the state's capital punishment system Monday after an unprecedented third failed lethal injection. Ivey's office issued a statement saying she had both asked Attorney General Steve Marshall to withdraw a motion seeking execution dates for 2 inmates and requested that the Department of Corrections undertake a full review of the state's execution process. Ivey also requested that Marshall not seek additional execution dates for any other death row inmates until the review is complete. The move followed the uncompleted execution Thursday of Kenneth Eugene Smith, which was the state's second such instance of being unable to put an inmate to death in the past 2 months, and its third since 2018. The state completed an execution in July, but only after a 3-hour delay caused by at least partly by the same problem with starting an IV line. Denying that prison officials or law enforcement are to blame for the problems, Ivy said legal tactics and criminal hijacking the system are at play here. For the sake of the victims and their families, we've got to get this right, she said. Correction Commissioner John Hamm said the department is fully committed and confident we can get this right. Everything is on the table, from our legal strategy in dealing with last-minute appeals to how we train and prepare to the order and timing of events on execution day to the personnel and equipment involved, Hamm said. In a statement issued through the governor's office, Marshall, the state's top prosecutor, didn't immediately say whether he would agree to Ivy's request. The attorney general read the governor and commissioner's comments with interest and will have more to say at a later date. Alabama Arise, a nonprofit that advocates on behalf of the poor, said Marshall should agree to a moratorium and urged the legislators to do their part to reduce the unfairness in Alabama's death penalty system. The Death Penalty Information Center, an anti-death penalty group with a large database on execution, said no state other than Alabama has had to halt an execution in progress since 2017, when Ohio halted Alva Campbell's lethal injection because workers couldn't find a vein. The executive director of the organization, Robert Durham, said Ivy was right to seek an investigation and a pause, but any review of the system needs to be done by someone other than the state's prison system. While Ivy blamed the defense efforts for execution failures, Dunham said her willful blindness to the prison system's woes were part of the problem. The Alabama Department of Corrections has a history of denying and bending the truth about its execution failures, and it cannot be trusted to meaningfully investigate its own incompetence and wrongdoing, he said. Earlier this year, after Tennessee Governor Bill Lee halted a lethal injection in April because he learned that the drugs hadn't been tested as required, he ordered an independent investigation and paused all executions through the end of the year. Alabama's execution of Joe Nathan James Jr. took several hours to get underway in July because of the problems establishing an IV line. Leading anti-death penalty group Reprieve U.S. Forensic Justice Initiative to claim the execution was botched. In September, the state called off the scheduled execution of Alan Eugene Miller because of a difficulty assessing his veins. Miller said in a court filing that the prison staff poked him with needles for more than an hour and at one point left him hanging vertically on the gurney before announcing they were stopping. Prison officials have maintained the delays were the result of the state carefully following procedures. Ivy asked the state to withdraw motions seeking execution dates for Miller, James, Edward, Barber, the only two death row inmates with such requests before the Alabama Supreme Court. Alabama in 2018 called off the execution of Doyle Hamm because of problems getting the intravenous line connected. Hamm had damaged veins because of lymphoma, hepatitis, and past drug use, his lawyer said. Hamm later died in prison of natural causes. Alabama should have imposed an execution moratorium after Hamm's failed execution for the benefit of everyone, said Bernard Harcourt, an attorney who represented Hamm for years. It's interesting in that article, when they mention Alan Eugene Miller, they don't mention the fact that in early September, he had his execution stayed until the protocols for nitrogen hypoxia were cemented and put into place so that he could be put to death in that way. It turned out that the Supreme Court overruled the decision to stay his execution until he could have his preferred method of execution, but they were unable to execute him via lethal injection despite getting the lower court decision overturned. And I will read you an article about the overturning of the decision right now. This is an article from the American Digest by Savannah Husley Pointer on September 29th, 2022. Supreme Court rejects challenge to lethal injection due to inmates' fear of needles. Last Monday, the Supreme Court authorized Alabama to execute Alan Eugene Miller via lethal injection. Miller had contended that he should have been executed using nitrogen hypoxia. According to The Blaze, a federal judge this week ruled with Miller earlier in the week and temporarily stopped the execution. However, a divided Supreme Court overturned that judge's decision in an unsigned judgment allowing the execution to proceed. Sonia Sotomayor, Elena Kagan, Amy Coney Barrett, and Ketanji Brown Jackson, the four female justices, all voiced their disagreement. Alabama approved a law in 2018 allowing death row inmates to choose a novel method of execution called nitrogen hypoxia, in which a person is fatally deprived of oxygen. Miller, who was found guilty in 1999 of killing 3 men, stated that he was afraid of needles and preferred to die by nitrogen hypoxia. The state wanted to execute Miller by lethal injection, claiming that Miller never asked for nitrogen hypoxia. Following the Supreme Court's directive, a jail staff attempted to place an IV in Miller's veins. The New York Times reports that the state was unable to finish the procedure before Miller's death warrant expired at midnight. Due to time restraints resulting from the lateness of the court proceedings, the execution was called off. Once it was determined the condemned inmate's veins could not be accessed in accordance with our protocol before the expiration of the death warrant, said Alabama Corrections Commissioner John Hamm. Alabama has experienced a number of occurrences involving botched executions in the recent years after being unable to install an intravenous line. The authorities postponed Doyle Hamm's execution in 2018, according to the Associated Press. Before we move forward, I would just like to say, please stick around till the end. I have 2 videos to show you. One is of an actual hypoxia training with airline pilots. The other is of the preference testing I was speaking of. So what's the holdup in using nitrogen hypoxia as a method of execution? Let's read this article from July of 2018 to find out. A tank filled with liquid nitrogen is seen outside of an Oklahoma City business that sells nitrogen for various commercial uses. The condemned man enters the room where he will draw his last breath. He will be restrained in some way, perhaps strapped to the T-shaped platform where other offenders have been executed by injection. He may have taken a sedative or will be given one in the room, but he likely won't be too groggy. The prisoner may then have a mask or plastic hood or bag strapped to his face. Colorless, odorless nitrogen gas will stream into the mask from a tank similar to those used to inflate helium balloons. The gas could come from one of thousands of distributors or manufacturers nationwide. If all goes according to plan, the man will be dead within minutes, oblivious to the fact that his blood oxygen level is plummeting, and he will soon pass out. The above steps are an approximation based on research of how the state of Oklahoma could use nitrogen inhalation to carry out future executions, becoming the first state to do so. Yet uncertainty surrounds how the state will obtain the gas, how it will force inmates to inhale it, and what will happen should they hold their breath or resist, and how to ensure guards and visitors are safe from its toxic fumes, all of which could open up legal, practical, and public perception challenges. State officials insist that executions using nitrogen hypoxia will be humane, although details have been scarce about how the first nitrogen execution would look. At a March press conference in which they announced the change of method, Oklahoma Department of Corrections Director Joe Alabal and Attorney General Mike Hunter contended it would be free of the problems that have plagued the state's use of lethal injection. Alabal declined an interview about how his agency's ongoing work on an execution protocol, which will spell out in detail the policies and procedures for carrying out a nitrogen execution. Alabal said in March he hoped to have a preliminary protocol in 90 to 120 days, but recently told State Impact Oklahoma that the effort will take longer than expected. We are continuing to develop the protocol in collaboration with the Attorney General's office. Corrections Department spokesman Matt Elliott said in a statement to Oklahoma Watch, "We feel confident that we will develop a protocol that provides an effective and humane execution method for the state of Oklahoma." Only 2 other states, Mississippi and Alabama, have passed laws allowing nitrogen executions, but neither is developing a protocol yet. Meanwhile, attorneys for death row inmates are poised to scrutinize the protocol and challenge any uncertainty or hint of cruelty in its procedures or science. That could delay the state's next execution by months, as attorneys take the matter to court, reminding judges that Oklahoma botched one execution in 2014 and used the wrong drug in another in 2015. If there are complications in using nitrogen, they will likely arise at the crucial steps in the protocol, which will be written to avoid violating the 8th Amendment's ban against cruel and unusual punishment or creating a spectacle that the public and elected leaders would not accept. The entire nation, much of it the world, in fact, is watching. At the March news conference, Hunter said the state will forge ahead because Oklahomans favor capital punishment and families of murder victims deserve justice. On the same article that I read to you, there's a gentleman who was in the Air Force who experienced the high altitude chamber training that they do for pilots. They do this for military pilots as well as for commercial pilots so that they can learn to recognize what it feels like to become hypoxic at high altitudes. And during this training, they generally use nitrogen. This gentleman is responding to some of the naysayers in the comments. Floyd in Florida says, "Nonsense. Nitrogen is the best way to go. You simply fall asleep and die. We used it in the Air Force in high altitude chambers. They started removing the oxygen and giving us only nitrogen first. Our color vision went, then all vision, then hearing, and we fell asleep. Had they not restored oxygen, we would have died. Much safer and cheaper than drugs or electricity." Trying to get this video done by the end of the night here, so I'm going to do some commentary on some actual hypoxia training. Keep an eye on the screen on the bottom right, and that will show you the vitals of the different pilots that they're talking to. And this gives you a pretty good idea of how this will affect the pilots.
That's it. Sammy 102, do we notice anything? And Sammy 101.
Dizzy with an unusual feeling in my body.
And what feeling would that be?
Feeling cold a bit.
Feeling cold now?
Yeah.
So you're feeling dizzy, and now you're feeling this unusual sensation in your body like you're cold.
Yeah, that's right.
Copy that. And Sammy 101, I see a nice little smile on your face.
Yeah.
What's up?
I'm just laughing.
Sammy 101, you're feeling excessively happy. You're suddenly very cold in the body and you're dizzy. Do you notice anything else?
No, that's it.
Sammy 101, you've had a cabin depressurization. Don't your mask.
I will link the full almost 4-minute video that I just did the commentary on with the pilot's hypoxia training in the description box if you would like to view the whole thing. At one point, one of their blood oxygen levels goes down to 50. And if these pilots were not given oxygen, they would have died during this training. As you can see, some of the pilots were experiencing euphoria. Some of them just felt strange. As their levels of oxygen got lower, they were experiencing more symptoms. Some symptoms of hypoxia may include rapid breathing, cyanosis, blue lips and nails, poor coordination, rosy cheeks, poor judgment, muscle and mental fatigue, headache, dizziness, visual impairment, tingling, euphoria, seizures, and death. This is a picture of a death pod that has been approved for use in Switzerland as of 2021. It is now 2022, and I have not seen anything about it being used in assisted suicides, but that is its purpose. It uses nitrogen hypoxia. I will link the article for this death pod in the description if you are interested in reading about it further. At this point, if lawmakers truly are not approving nitrogen hypoxia due to concerns for the victims' families and how they might perceive the murderers of their family members being executed in a way that is painless, that's something that should be talked about. And they need to stop hiding behind the concern that nitrogen hypoxia is not a humane way to die. Of course, no one knows what it really feels like to die of nitrogen hypoxia. We only have the evidence of the airline pilots that have experienced euphoria during their training, and as well as other people who have experienced it and been brought back from it. The only other research that's been done is the research that has been done in the humane slaughtering of farm animals, and I will show you a video about that now. So another trigger warning before I show this video where they do the preference testing with the farm animals and the nitrogen gas.
There is one British scientist who has been developing a humane method of killing based on the euphoric effects of the altitude chamber. Dr. Mohan Raj from Bristol University. has been researching hypoxia as a way to kill farm animals in slaughterhouses. But instead of using a multi-million-pound machine, he's using a painless gas.
Yes, it is indeed, yeah.
You've been using hypoxia, Humane, to kill.
This is a portion of the video that they showed us in my death penalty class, where we were first told about nitrogen hypoxia as an alternative method of execution.
Farm animals. How are you doing that?
We're using argon or nitrogen.
You're using a gas?
Yes,
And that produces the same sort of hypoxia as I experienced in the altitude chambers?
that's correct, yeah. Principally, they deprive the brain of oxygen.
And how have you been doing that?
We wanted to choose the gas mixture that is animal welfare friendly. And the best way of deciding that is to ask the pigs if they were given a free choice to choose one or the other gas, what they call preference testing.
This is the first time I ever heard the term preference testing.
Dr. Raj conducted an experiment in which pigs were offered apples in a chamber filled with different hypoxia-inducing gases. First, he used carbon dioxide, a toxic gas that irritates the body.
If they find a gas mixture aversive, they will not feed in that atmosphere.
Then he used inert gases, such as nitrogen and argon. Unlike carbon dioxide and the poison used in the gas chamber, inert gases have no detectable smell, taste, or physical sensation. So the body has no way of knowing that the oxygen in the air has been entirely replaced by another gas. The painless effect is confirmed by what the pig did next.
They woke up and just looked around and went back to feed again on the apples. And that indicated to us that it is a stress-free induction of unconsciousness.
And can I see this equipment?
Of course you can.
So simple.
So, it is. We have a source of nitrogen here,
Yeah.
taken through this tube, and the gas is delivered using the face mask to pigs restrained in this hammock.
And would you be able to change this mask to a human mask and apply it to me?
Yes, you could, but I wouldn't recommend it.
Why?
Because inhaling pure nitrogen, you will be rendered unconscious within 15 seconds.
15 seconds, really?
That's
And how long to death?
Within a minute,
Really?
yes.
That's astonishing. So this really is the perfect killing machine.
Appears to be the case, yes.
So it turns out that a canister of gas, a tube, and a mask can be the perfect killing machine. It's as simple as that. The method is cheap, it's viable, it's infallible. Not only is it painless, but the person dies with euphoria. And so science does provide the answer to how you can have a humane method of execution.
Before we close, let's read one more article from Oklahoma around the time that nitrogen hypoxia was approved as a method of execution. Oklahoma, first state to approve nitrogen asphyxiation for executions. Oklahoma Governor Mary Fallin signed a law today allowing nitrogen to be used in executions in the state in case lethal injection is ruled unconstitutional or the drugs are not available. Oklahoma is the first state to approve such a method. It would involve placing a mask over an inmate's face and supplying pure nitrogen instead of air. The condemned person slowly asphyxiates from lack of oxygen. Besides lethal injection, other methods currently approved for use in other states are electrocution, gas chamber, hanging, and firing squad. One of the differences between the way that nitrogen hypoxia would be given in training and the way that it would be given during an execution is that in training, it's not pure nitrogen. In an execution or in the preference testing situation, once they got the answer that they wanted from the preference testing when they were just trying to find a humane way to slaughter the animals, is that they are delivering pure nitrogen to these animals instead of partial nitrogen like they do in a training. Let's continue reading this article. Nitrogen-induced hypoxia is a painless form of execution that doesn't require any specific pharmaceutical compounds or any medical expertise to administer. Rep. Mike Christian, our Oklahoma City, the House sponsor of the legislation, was quoted by the Tulsa World saying it is a far better alternative to the electric chair should lethal injection ever become unavailable. And so I thank the governor for signing this bill into law. Many states have experienced shortages of lethal injection drugs because manufacturers opposed to the capital punishment have refused to supply them. As I said in my previous video, that is something that a lot of states are having an issue with, is that they're not able to find the drugs anymore, and so they're having to use experimental methods. And so if they're already using experimental methods to carry out executions that may or may not work, and sometimes these experimental methods do fail, then why not use something as infallible as nitrogen hypoxia? Because either way, they're doing something that's never been done before. So why not do something that works? Okay, moving on. A study commissioned by Oklahoma and published last month concluded that an execution protocol that induced hypoxia via nitrogen inhalation would be a humane method to carry out a death sentence. A year ago, Oklahoma carried out a botched execution of death row inmate Clayton D. Lockett, who was given the sedative midazolam, sorry, that's probably terribly mispronounced, due to a shortage of the drug normally used, sodium thiopental. Lockett took 45 minutes to die as he writhed in pain on the execution gurney. So, using drugs that are not the tried and true drugs used in lethal injection is something that is causing an issue. It is experimental. Even though it's still lethal injection, it's not the tried and true methods. It's not as effective. And we're seeing that through the evidence as these executions are being carried out. In closing, I would like to say that since the beginning of the history of capital punishment in the United States and other nations, there have been changes in the way that executions have been carried out. Executions used to be gory public spectacles meant to prevent recidivism and new criminal behavior. Then they became more private and solemn events due to the process of death being less palatable to the public. Due to shortages in medicines used for executions and other challenges, execution by nitrogen hypoxia really could be a win-win. Nitrogen hypoxia works, and it works in a matter of minutes. No more missed veins or state executions, no more prisoners surviving executions due to the drugs not being strong enough, and in that respect, no more PR nightmares for the death penalty. It is at least worth a try, considering the alternative method of execution could be considered cruel and unusual due to the experimental issues that have cropped up in the last decade or so as a result of being unable to find the correct drugs. The public concerns of the inmates suffering a painful death would also be calmed due to the nature of this type of death. Sometimes to keep something around, we must change it and decide, is it more important that the prisoner dies, or is it more important that they suffer? If you made it to the end of this video, thank you for watching. I know this is a very controversial topic, so please be respectful to each other as well as to me in the comments. I respect and am open to listening to all viewpoints in this matter, even those who do not agree with me or think that my ideas or the ideas presented in this video are terrible ideas. Until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, stay kind, and live your best life.